All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the National Weather Service Columbia podcast. I'm your co-host, Matt Gropp. Pierce is off tonight. He's taking care of his baby, so I'm flying solo just for the introduction here. And what we're going to talk about this episode is our interview with Rich Okolski, who is the meteorologist in charge, or the MIC, at the office here in Columbia, and his time with the National Weather Service in Memphis when he had the misfortune and experience to survey an EF5 tornado that was part of the historic April 27th, 2011 tornado outbreak. We mentioned a little bit about that outbreak in our last podcast, talking a little bit about some of the ingredients that go into creating such a prolific tornado event. And we figured this podcast is going to be coming out on April 27th. That it was only appropriate to discuss some first-person experience of that event. So we're just going to jump right in. It's a bit of a sobering episode compared to our usual, but it's fitting for such a prolific event. Welcome to the set, Rich.
Thank you, man. Thank you for having me.
Yep, he's the head honcho here.
Yes.
Big decision maker.
The GM of the office.
Yep.
So we're going to cover, as you know, going with our April 27th theme for this episode. Rich is going to talk to us a little bit about his experience on that day at a different forecast office. Mm-hmm. But first, tell us a little bit about your career and how you ended up in the Weather Service, Rich.
All right. I received my degree, my Bachelor of Science, from Rutgers University in Meteorology in 1989. Mm-hmm. I went to work briefly for a private weather company that no longer exists. It was CompuWeather in Flushing, Queens, and it's now Fleet Weather. I got to do radio work with the landfall of Hurricane Hugo with some stations in the southeast. Cool. So that was my first big weather event as a meteorologist. Then I took a break from meteorology for 3 years and went active duty with the Army. I was a combat engineer officer at the end of the Cold War in Germany, and then led a platoon in frontline combat in Operation Desert Storm. At that point, after my 3-year commitment was coming to an end, I had a decision of whether to make a career out of the Army or to get back into meteorology. And I love soldiering, but I love meteorology more, so I went back into meteorology, and I joined the Weather Service in June of 1993 in WSFO Phoenix, pre-modernization. I caught the wave of the modernization era. I went on to be a meteorologist at the Medford Forecast Office, then a lead meteorologist in Tucson. I helped start the fire weather program at WFO Tucson as we were going from the 52 offices to the 122 that we have today. Yeah. Then I moved on, and I was the National Severe Weather Program Officer, Manager for the Office of Services in the early 2000s. Helped roll out the modernized Convective Watch Suite that we have that is the partnership between the Storm Prediction Center and the local offices. Also valid time event code, storm-based warnings, and also the graphic hazards generator that we use to issue our long diffuse products. I wanted to get back. I also did a stint for a year as the executive officer for the Weather Service Director at the time, D.L. Johnson, and I was heavily involved with the response and recovery with Hurricane Katrina, supporting the offices that were hit really hard by Katrina in 2005. The last 18 years, I've been back in field offices. I was the warning coordination meteorologist in Memphis for 5.5 years. We had the Super Tuesday tornado outbreak, the April 27th Super Outbreak in 2011, which we'll get back to, and then also the largest, most significant lower Mississippi River flooding in 75 years. They actually had to detonate the Birds Point levee to save Cairo, Illinois.
Wow. Jeez.
I ended up briefing one senator, Senator Lamar Alexander, and the congressional delegation, along with the district commander for the Corps of Engineers in Memphis in 2011. I went on. I was the MIC in Caribou, Maine for 5 years. Worked some big snow events, ice jam flood events, and did a lot of work with Environment Canada during that time period. And then I arrived here almost 7 years ago. And have worked a number of hurricanes, Hurricane Matthew, Irma, Dorian, Michael, Florence. So it's been a fair amount. And then the big tornado outbreak we had in April 2020. So I've been working for Uncle Sam for almost 34 years in various spots. So not anywhere close to hanging up my spurs, but I'm definitely in the fourth quarter of my career.
Yeah, that's quite the list of accomplishments. Thanks for talking about that, Rich.
So it's a little bit more robust than our resume.
Yeah. So let's get into the April 27th event, and specifically the Smithville, Mississippi tornado. One of the more recent F5s. I think the last one was in 2013, so it would fall into the category of the most recent EF5s surveyed in the continental U.S. You were the WCM in Memphis at the time, and you were on shift the night before. Let's talk about the lead up to that event. What was that like?
Well, lead up, we were step even back 2 days. We were in a moderate risk or higher of severe weather risk for 48 hours, starting on Monday the 25th and continuing through the finale, the big finale on the 27th. We knew that we were going to get a historic flood event, and I was briefing not only on the tornado risk, but also on the flood risk to the county and city emergency manager for Memphis, Shelby County, Bob Nations, and he was having to make a decision because they had the Memphis in May Festival, the Beale Street Music Festival, the Barbecue Fest coming up in early May, about whether he had to pull out the observing equipment, over $1 million worth of equipment out of Tom Lee Park, and then also whether they have to find an alternate site. I said, you're going to most likely get the music fest in, but the barbecue fest, the park is going to be underwater. Yeah. So you had to go find the old fairgrounds to do that. So, I'm already thinking about flooding, and then the severe weather ramps up, and we had at least 8 people in the office in Memphis for 48 straight hours that we had stretched out.
Crazy. That's crazy.
And I was working the flooding side. The lead was working the severe weather side. And we actually had an EF3 move into Monroe County 12 hours before Smithville. And it caused some confusion at the end of the survey because it wasn't lining up. It was doglegging. And I'm like, this doesn't make scientific sense. And I went, oh yeah, the EF3 from 12 hours prior. So it was like, it was just like, it was just crazy. We had 10 to 20 inches of rain leading up to that event. So we had flooding, we had severe weather, we had a little bit of everything leading up to that event. And when we knew we had tornado damage down in northeast Mississippi. And I came off the midshift and I said, can I tough it out and go down there and survey with somebody who slept? And, then we looked at the satellite, we looked at the soundings and went, nope, it's not happening. This is looking like a really bad day. So I went back and I was so tired after that night I crashed, and then I woke up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and all hell's breaking loose. Because the big event was underway by the time I woke up that afternoon.
Yeah, I think it was so interesting on April 27th, the same sort of event happened all across the Deep South. Chattanooga had an EF2, I think, that happened at like 7 a.m., and then they had an EF4 12 hours later. It happened all over the place, North Mississippi all the way to Chattanooga. So I guess we want to cover we did a little bit of the science there, just about the background of Smithville, but I think you have more of an interesting perspective on actually surveying the damage from that EF5 tornado and get into a little bit of the human side and the impacts that these catastrophic weather events can have. So you want to tell us a little bit about how that survey started and some of the precursors you heard before you actually went on the survey?
Yeah, sure. I went with the other person on the survey with me was our data acquisition program manager, our senior technician, Zwemer Ingram. And background with Z, as he went by, was he had lived through the 1974 Super Outbreak as a teenager in northern Alabama. Wow. So he had experience with historic outbreaks of that magnitude. And we start heading down there, and we have to backtrack because I mentioned the flooding.
Yeah.
We had a flooded road and had to find another way to get onto Highway 22 to get down to Tupelo and eventually to Smithville. Well, while we're making it down there and Zwemer's driving, I get a call from Tracy Farr, who's the district coordinator for a bunch of counties in northeast Mississippi, and I hear an urgency in Tracy's voice that I haven't heard in the 5 years we worked together. She says, "How soon can you get down here?" I said, "Well, we had to backtrack due to flooding, but I think we can get down there by 10 a.m." And she's like, "Okay, good. Get here as soon as you can." And I follow up, and I'm like, "All right, what are you seeing? Compare this to Yazoo City, which was an EF4 in 2010. Are you seeing the same? Are you seeing it not as bad or worse?" And it was like worse, like no hesitation.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay. I at that point called the Met Services Division chief in Southern Region, a guy named Judd Ladd, and I said, "Judd," I said, the emergency manager on the ground is saying this is worse than Yazoo. We have potentially an EF5 situation. I said, "Do I have the freedom to call it if I see the damage as a 5? And Judd says, "Well, you rated a 4 a couple of years ago in Union University in Jackson, Tennessee, so you got experience. It's your call."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Okay, good." So I get down there, and we finally make it down there, and we start seeing we're not even at the heart, like where it tore through and destroyed everything. We're seeing really weird things coming, driving in, and Zwemer is starting to, flash back to 1974. He's like, "Oh my goodness, this looks like the Super Outbreak in 74. Because we're seeing I saw a house going in that well-built home. One end of the house is standing up, so is the other end, but the middle's gone.
Yeah.
And so that's just the beginning of when we're getting into town. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, all right, the only thing I can compare this to is what the United States Air Force did to the Republican Guard on the Highway of Death and also Sophomore in Iraq. I'm like, this is horrific. So we get in there and we find the Mobile Emergency Operations Center for the state of Mississippi there. And the Deputy State EMA Director, Ken Buckley, is waiting for us, along with Tracy, and also Bunky Goza, the local emergency manager. In addition, and this is the first and only time, and hopefully the only time I do this, is waiting for me as well as a U.S. congressman to come talk to me. He's there to talk, both not only to get a briefing from me, but also to comfort the people that are devastated.
Yeah.
As we notice, we start looking around just in the first glance is that the police station's gone, the post office is gone, City Hall is gone, and there is a hole in the town that's just gone, like just leveled, classic EF5 damage. That there's nothing there. So we start. I brief the folks on what the situation is, and then we start surveying, and we start on the southwest side of town, working to the northeast, and it was very sobering. One thing I saw that I hadn't seen before at the damage survey was, you've probably heard the term the 1,000-yard stare. May not have been 1,000 yards, but it was certainly 100 yards with the emergency responders who had been there on site the previous afternoon after it tore through. And I see one responder who really can't look me in the eye, smoking a cigarette while I smell propane in the air from the broken pipes. And I'm like, okay, whatever they saw was just horrific, and this is how they're coping with it. There were shredded appliances. There were, they had the toe-in nails. They had everything that you would expect for a well-built home. Just they had the joists. They had everything. This was an upscale community. So you weren't talking about any sliders. They were torn off the foundation. Their appliances shredded. There was a 1965 Chevy pickup that they could not find. They had cadaver-sniffing dogs sniffing the creek behind the town to try to find corpses. There was a home that was gone that they told me the babysitter had covered the kids. She'd done the heroic thing and she died protecting the kids. The kids got impaled with tree limbs and had to be medevaced to Memphis.
Jeez.
There was one storm shelter I could see where the tornado ripped through that everybody who went in there survived, but there was a woman who was claustrophobic that refused to go in there, and when they came back out, they found her corpse.
Yeah.
It was just harrowing.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I saw was, we went down the other side of town and we found tombstones, big tombstones that were knocked over, but they were knocked over the opposite direction of the motion of the tornado, the direction of the tornado. And Z and I had to look, and we went back into our science side and went, all right, inflow.
Yeah.
The inflow is that strong. And then the one thing I'll bring before I take a pause for a second is the Ford Explorer.
Yes.
The Ford Explorer, thank goodness no one was in there, was picked up by the tornado, hurled a half mile, hit one of the two water towers in town. They took a picture of the dent. They matched the paint on the water tower to the Ford Explorer, and then it caromed off and went for another quarter mile until it landed. And it looked like it had gone through a trash compactor.
Yeah.
So, there are other things that I could talk about, but those are really the most remarkable things that I saw of what severe weather at its worst can do.
Yeah. Jeez. It's kind of unbelievable. I don't even know how to follow that. I'm trying to think of questions. It's just kind of remarkable. You have anything?
I don't know. So that's the human side of an EF5. And what it can do, and hopefully something no one listening to this ever has to deal with again.
Hopefully we don't ever have to survey one.
Yeah, hopefully. So
there were 15, 16 dead, 40 injured.
Yeah.
The emergency manager who we worked with, Bunky Goza, was outstanding. He was working with us, and we had about 43 minutes lead time.
Yeah.
With that lead time, he was able to hold the children in school because it occurred like 3:30 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And if the kids had been released into town, you probably would have tripled the number of fatalities and injuries. And that Bunky was a lifesaver on that to safeguard his town. I guess the other thing with this was the advent of folks, senior leadership in the Weather Service realizing that meteorologists were emergency responders and mental health services. That that you're issuing the warnings, but you also deal with the aftermath. There are some of us who go out there and see what Mother Nature has destroyed, not only the property, but more important, the people, the fatalities and the injuries. And that there are times when there's the employee assistance program, but that is insufficient. And the Super Outbreak in 2011 was really a milestone that they got, particularly for the Huntsville office. Not only ran over their service area, but also nearby their homes. It was really hard on them. And it took me a couple weeks after I surveyed it, and I had seen some awful things in combat, to really feel right again. Because you're not used to seeing that type of suffering. And knowing, even when you did the right thing and you had ample warning that people are going to die, and there were over 500 people that died due to strong and violent tornadoes on that day, which was unheard of. It hadn't happened in the modern era of weather service. And, that was a very sobering thing. And we made a number of changes with how we've done business in our business model coming out of April 27, 2011.
Yeah. That was actually going to be geared in that manner. What were some of the things that you were in management in the Memphis office? So what are some of the things that you all kind of employed to try and help your employees cope with that afterwards?
To be honest, we didn't have a break. We went right into the Mississippi River flood. And that was a 3-week process. So we really didn't get a chance to regroup as an office going out of there. And it was on the far side. It was on the southeast part of our service area. So Memphis proper was not impacted by it. But I will tell you this: I went on to become the MIC in Caribou a few months after the event. I had full intentions of putting in a storm shelter in my garage. After that, I was like, I told my ex-spouse, I was like, we have to do it. I know it's probably we're going to be putting $5,000 in there, but after what I saw, we need to do it. Yeah. There has to be a safe place for us. Yeah. In the event of a violent tornado. Yeah. Because what I saw was not survivable above the ground.
Mm-hmm. Man.
All right. Well, that was the heaviest segment we've done on this podcast so far, but thank you so much, Rich, for coming on.
We appreciate it.
Thank you for sharing those experiences. Hopefully no one in the Weather Service has to survey something like that again, but unfortunately, it's just a matter of time. Yep. Unfortunately, so.
I guess the one thing I'll close with, since this is a South Carolina one, is that we went through an outbreak in April 2020, just before you guys got here. Yeah. And it was in the early morning hours. And I did the news conference. It was actually the governor's regular COVID news conference that became the tornado outbreak news conference as well. That was an early morning event. If the atmosphere, the way it was set up, had been in the afternoon, we had like 7 EF3s and an EF4. We could have easily gone up one category if that was a peak heating event in the afternoon. So, when you think that, that happens in Dixie Alley, yes, there's a higher probability of that occurring, but it's not impossible in South Carolina to get a EF5.
That's a great reminder.
Yep. Yeah, again, that was the interview we did with Hunter, April 13th, 2020. Yep. And, it happened at 4 a.m. So kind of the best case scenario for timing instead of 4 p.m.
And it still produced what it produced. Yeah, just unbelievable. Well, Rich, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing those stories.
So you're welcome.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening to the latest episode of the National Weather Service Columbia podcast. We hope you found that interesting and a bit sobering, and a reminder of what Mother Nature can do at her most angry, and unfortunately the human toll that is associated with that. So again, if you are interested in more of this podcast, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on social media. We're going to try to get back to a bit more of a regular schedule. We know we had a bit of a break there, but trying to get back to every 2 weeks or so. So thank you. Have a good one.